Now, Jacques Derrida, I think is the way you say his name. He's a French guy, so I probably got it wrong. He passed away in 2004. He's a French philosopher, and he coined the phrase of deconstruction to describe the scrutinizing of one's core beliefs, one's core practices, one's core values of a faith or faith tradition by taking apart the belief system to determine its validity. So this can result in unbelief. Deconstructing your faith can lead to unbelief, or it can be a way to rebuild your faith authentically. Pew Research Center in 2021 said 26% of American Jews say they do not believe in God. Barna group studied, they found that 37% of Christians report having deconstructed their faith, indicating their faith deconstruction is apparently fairly common within Christianity. Barna went on to say that 42% of U.S. report having deconstructed their faith. In 2023 and 2024, the American Religious Landscape Study said that 29% now identify themselves as either atheists, agnostics, or nothing in particular. Probably the lion's share is nothing in particular rather than atheists or agnostics. Now, there are two kinds of quote-unquote Christians. One who absorbs the worldly mindset, and that's the way they deconstruct their faith. And the other disperses the mind of Christ to the world around them. And that's the predominant way of looking at it. I don't know if that really defines it. Let me give you a story that might help you understand what I mean by that. There's two camels that were both loaded down with a ton. One had a ton of cotton on the camel's back, and the other had a ton of salt on their back. They came to the river, and the one with the ton of salt on its back, when it got into the water, actually the weight got lighter because the water began to be absorb the salt, and the salt dispersed some, and it ended up being lighter, and so the camel made it all the way across the river. The other one had a ton of cotton on its back, but when it got into the water, the cotton absorbed all the water around it, and it drowned. Same amount of weight, but because the reaction of how you deal with it ended up costing the life of the one. So two kinds of deconstruction can happen. Those who scrutinize their faith with an unbiased view toward the truth, and those who scrutinize their faith with a biased desire to believe what they already have decided they just want to believe. And those deconstructing today are really, in many ways in our culture, at a disadvantage because there's so much in this world, there's so much diversity, so much accessibility to just about any culture. And this mobile world, there's a lot of biases out there, and there are biases that are very strong and not very flexible. And for most of history, though, people lived and died in a system that they were born into. As you recall, our grandparents or great-grandparents lived in one location for the most part, knew the people that they grew up around, and they experienced that. There was very little deconstructing of your faith. You went along with what you were taught, whether good or bad, and that's just as much often as bad as it was good. But it was less of a problem of trying to negotiate with what is correct, what isn't correct, if you're struggling with that. Globalization, immigration, travel, the printed page, the internet, social media have opened the doors to a multitude of voices that were not available to us a generation or two ago. We didn't listen to everybody because we didn't know they even hardly existed. The perspectives have changed. Experiences have changed. A fellow named Gregory Boyd said this in a book called The Benefit of the Doubt. He said, "It's much easier to remain certain of your beliefs when you are not in personal contact with people who believe differently. But when you encounter people with different beliefs, and when those people sincerely and devotion possibly put yours to shame, all their sincerity and devotion put yours to shame, things become quite a bit more difficult. So we attend school and we come in contact with people who differ in our thinking and in our beliefs. We go to work, we work alongside people who have different beliefs, but the world is now much more in contact with us in other ways. And it's not a threat unless you want to rebel. And if you want to rebel, it's easy to do it and to end up leaving the faith that you were raised in. You can believe something different real easy. And by the way, young people, if that's what you end up doing and you leave the church and you leave the faith, let me just tell you, it does not take a genius to leave what you were taught. And it isn't a sign of greater mind to find fault with what? It's not a sign of being really smart. You ask a question that others can't answer. It's really not. But a lot of people think that's what that's a sign of. I want to look at 4 reasons people have always been deconstructing their faith. And I hope that you'll learn the benefits of deconstructing and the problems with it. That's why I said it's just a hard lesson, because I'm actually talking about both sides. I'm talking out both sides of my mouth. Sorry about that. So here we go. Number 1. And we're not going to read the whole thing again. That's participant overwhelming. So one of the reasons that people end up deconstructing their faith and even sometimes leaving the faith is because they get overwhelmed. They're a participant in what they believe, but they are overwhelmed. And a lot of times what causes that is what's dealt with in verses 1 through 4. I'll just pick up in verse 3 after he talks about the scribes and the Pharisees sit in Moses' seat. Verse 3 says, "Therefore, whatever they tell you to observe, that observe and do, but do not do according to their works, for they say and do not." And verse 4 is really speaks to this. "For they bind heavy burdens hard to bear and lay it on men's shoulders, but they themselves will not move them with one of their fingers." Sometimes leadership in the kingdom and in the world, in the religious world, push people, especially if you don't really believe in grace. You can be pushed really, really, really hard to do more. High performance people of faith are the ones I'm talking about now. So you may be thinking, I'm thinking that these are fringe people. One of the major people who will deconstruct their faith are the people who are high performance in their faith. And the tendency in high performance people is to burn out. Many in ministry deconstruct their faith. There are a lot of preachers who walked away from their faith. And I'm talking about of every genre out there. Every kind you can think of are leaving more than you might imagine. And you saw a lot of that probably around COVID, but I'm talking about in the general day-to-day. And it's not the why, but the who that scares us, because it is these people who are often very dedicated. And the spiritual apathetic destruction does happen, but nobody pays attention to them. When somebody who's a fringe, who barely comes to church, deconstructs, hardly anybody notices, especially if they don't have hardly any friends in the church. But when somebody is in some kind of a leadership position or is up front a good bit and they deconstruct, that can be very devastating to people around them. Josh Packard and Ashley Hope, sociologists in 2015, noticed a startling pattern. It said that many of the people who had left the church were once considered some of the strongest and most active members in the church. 38% of church leaders considered leaving ministry in the past year. So, and it's happening. In Galatians 6 and verse 9, and King James, I like King James on this verse because of the way it words it. "And let us not be weary in well-doing, for in due season we shall reap if we faint not." Most of the new versions say, "And let us not be weary in doing well." But well-doing is actually better, because the expression is that things You may not be very successful in your faith. You don't have to be successful in your faith, winning souls and teaching all the Bible classes. To have faith, you can be very faithful. There are a lot of preachers who are very faithful in places that are dying. This idea that every church should be growing is not rational because you don't know the circumstances. There are many circumstances out there. The community is not growing. It's dying, and fewer people are living there than lived there last year. If you live in a town and every year it gets smaller, you just recognize that happens to preachers all the time. And so sometimes you think, well, he's the successful one. And a lot of times, they just moved to a place that was booming. Everybody was moving in there, and you thought they did an outstanding job, and all they did is do what every other preacher does, and people came in because people were moving in the area. And most people don't, like Rick Warren, y'all think he's so powerful because his church grew so big. You've all read about him, but before he left the seminary, he looked up the fastest growing community in the nation, and that's where he went. Okay, just thought I'd throw that in, something to pay attention to. So doing well-doing, you can be engaged in well-doing and get faint and want to quit because it's not working and people aren't being helped as much as you'd like to see. So many in ministry have to deal with this, but I'm just trying to suggest to you, some of you who teach Bible classes, some of you who have spoken, some of you are engaged, elders, you think you're invulnerable, deacons, Bible class teachers, I'm talking to you. Christians can have a deconstructing faith, but they are the participants when they get overwhelmed. And it's not always the church that overwhelms them, but sometimes it is, especially if you're struggling with grace. Second lesson. Prideful orthodoxy is a real problem. Jesus is dealing with it in this text. And it's part of the reason people in Judaism weren't more dedicated than they were, because they saw the hypocrisy that he was dealing with. I'll just pick up in verses 5, 6, and 7. I won't read that whole text. It says, but all their works they do to be seen by men. They make their phylacteries broad and enlarge the borders of their garments. Phylacteries, the thing they wore here, and the borders are the four places with the knots, with these things that look like feathers. That's the reason it talks about God covering you with his feathers. Verse 6, they love the best places at feasts, the best seats in the synagogue. Verse 7, greetings in the marketplace. So it's not talking about they just love the fellowship. They love the greeting, which is a different thing entirely. And to be called by men, Rabbi, Rabbi, or great man. So the prideful prioritization of conformity to leaders over unity can drive people away. I don't know if you heard that. That's difficult to hear all of that. For many young people, and so I'm talking to younger people now, 20s down, many young people, ambiguity, curiosity, mystery are essential to their faith journeys. I know that sounds strange to you, maybe if you're a little older, but many faith communities, pride forces conformity. So we thought that was keeping them safe, but sometimes we're driving them out the door. Bonnie Christian, in a book called A Flexible Faith, wrote this: we can get so stuck in our own little pool that we never notice the stream of orthodoxy is wide and deep and beautiful. Without even realizing it, we can become convinced our own tradition of Christianity is the one Christian alternative to non-belief. And when it comes to spiritual matters, questions and doubts are inevitable. Now, you may not want to admit it, because I heard Billy Graham one time, I've never had any doubts. Well, I didn't believe Billy Graham about a lot of stuff, so I might as well not believe him about that. So I don't believe that's true. If it is, I think he was closed-minded. I think it's actually essential that you have some doubts from time to time. Question, why is this happening to me? What is this about? I think that's actually a growth period in your life. And let me be a little open here, maybe more open than you're going to be comfortable with. I began deconstructing my faith between 1978 and 1979, 45 years ago. I'm still engaged in it. That's right. I'm still engaged in it. It started, let me give you an understanding of what I'm really talking about. This started in about the 1970s on MDR, marriage, divorce, and remarriage. Big issue in the church back then. Huge issue. There were debates everywhere. Maybe you don't remember it, but it was a big issue. And then that wasn't the big issue. Then there was the big F, little f over fellowship. Okay? And each of these I dug into. I dug into it. I thought, well, if there's something wrong, I'm going to try to find out what it is. And so I dug into the big F, little f in fellowship. I'm seeing you look at me like, what is that about? I can't explain all of these, but basically it's about big F means you and I have fellowship because we're in the church. Little f, we have fellowship with people who aren't in the church of Christ. That's a big discussion that was up. It doesn't matter what the truth is on that right now for the sake of the discussion. Then it was the debate over women used in worship. And by the way, that comes up about every 10 years, I've noticed. About every 10 years, somebody comes to me and says, I've been studying, and here's something you need to learn. And I'm like, well, thank you. Okay. And this led me to begin deconstructing everything. And I've pretty much deconstructed everything that you think you believe and that I believe. If I find something new, I deconstruct that too. And by that, what I mean is, well, let's just show you how deep. Baptism. Is it essential? I dug in. Just dug in. And all I was taught, and I knew what the Bible said, but had I missed something, right? Have you ever done that? Did I miss something? What do I need to see? The indwelling of the Holy Spirit. Yep. Deep. Years into that. The Spirit, do we have it? What can He do? Grace. That was a big one. Spent a lot of time in that. What is the real truth about grace? What does it mean? What are we supposed to do? Works. How does works fit into salvation? And no, I wasn't teaching any of this. This is just stuff on my own that I've done. I have stacks and stacks and stacks of books and looking into it. The canon itself, this canon here, is that right? Now, you wouldn't need to do that, but I needed to do that. I need to make sure those books were the books we are supposed to have. Creation itself, the study of creation. The flood, did it really happen? What's the evidence of that? The Tower of Babel, did it really exist? What was it about? Garden of Eden, did that really happen? Where was it? How did that happen? Nephilim, is that real? Did they really exist? Giants, which is similar to that statement. Demons, what are demons? I'm not talking about devils, I'm not talking about the angels that fell with Satan. That's a different discussion. Demons, which I don't believe were angels, by the way. But anyway, then angels. And then the falling angels, the good angels, even taught some on that. Job, what is the real message of Job? Is it true what I'm being told? I've been in all the Bible classes. Y'all been in the Bible classes. You go through, and I'm not talking about the books. Obviously I did that. Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Acts, Romans, 1st, 2nd Corinthians, Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians. Yeah, every one of them, tearing them apart, trying to figure out, did Paul really write that? Is that really the way it ought to be? And why do I do that? Why would I do that? Because if it's not true, I'd get up and tell you. I think that's my responsibility. I really would. Ecclesiastes, what did it mean? Instrumental music, been into that deep many, many times. Deep many, many times. The purpose of the virgin birth, why? The purpose of tongues, the 3 reasons. And I don't have time to deal with them. There are 3 reasons that tongues existed and they went away. Miracles. What are we taught about that? What is really true about that? I don't agree with everything. And that's the other thing that happens in this. You learn some things that you don't fully agree with what I've heard. Right? You've done that, haven't you? I bet you've done that. So I've done that on a lot of things. And so it didn't quite line up. And then I could go into hell, Exodus, Revelation, which, by the way, I don't agree with almost anybody about. Predestination, Calvinism, don't agree with a lot of people on that. The kneeling oath, we'll talk about that another day. Romans 8, Romans 9, Romans 11, the essentiality of the failure of Christ and why that was critical. The infinite number of sins The cross itself and how and why the cross saves. Why did that need to happen? The son of perdition, who that is, what that's about, and the final prophets. And the reason I'm saying all that is Acts 17 verse 11 says, these were more faithful than those in Thessalonica in that they received the word with all readiness and searched the scriptures daily to find out whether these things were so. That's deconstructing your faith. So many church leaders claim to only want to know the truth. And what I've found is I've heard people many, many times tell me, you would be my best friend if you'd point out what I'm telling you something, most preachers don't really mean that. They just say that. They just say it. They think they mean that until you bring something up that obviously kind of disagrees with something they believe. And then it's all, oh, you're not being faithful. That's where that's at. So Christians can have deconstructing faith from prideful orthodoxy. And what I mean by that is you can be so proud of your orthodoxy, you can't even consider that you might be wrong on anything. And you have to be willing to consider you're wrong on everything. That's real deconstruction. But you got to look at it. Well, I'll show you in a minute. All right, so the next point. Okay, this is a perverse obstinacy. Now, I'm not going to read this because that's a long, 13 through 33, that's a lot. But let me just point out in that little section, 1333, the word hypocrites used 8 times. The word blind used 4 times. Fools is used twice, and serpents 1, unless you count brood of vipers, the second one. There's some serious perversity that drives people to leave. What I'm trying to say is young people watch all us old folks. And when they see that there's something not being straight with them, they perceive that we're not being totally open about what we believe. You want to see a flood go out the door? If they just perceive it, it doesn't have to be true. If they perceive that we're hiding something, that we won't consider something, that we won't look at something, people will walk away from the church over that. Seen it happen. So trust in the morality of our foundational institutions is declining, folks. What are our foundational institutions? They're government. Let me ask you, do you think people are having trouble trusting the government? Amen, Walls? Okay. How about business? We've heard of Enron. Do you think that people are having trouble trusting their businesses and their companies that they work for? Do they really feel loyal to their businesses like they once did? I don't think so. How about the media? Do you really trust the media, or are you always second-guessing the media? I don't think we trust it. And then you say, well, but we're the church. Listen, the church is under the same scrutiny, if not more so. Why? Because it's been churches that have molested little boys and little girls, okay? And having affairs in the church. And the world has seen it. It's been on TV. They've seen it everywhere. Let me tell you something. People look at us not the way they once did. Once upon a time, everybody thought everybody went to church. Well, churches were just trustworthy. Not so much anymore. So sexual misconduct and accusations have seriously hurt the reputation. Gallup poll says this, that the trust in pastors, which they would call me that, the trust in pastors and clergy is at an all-time low. 51% of 55 years old or older have favorable views of church leaders. So all you old toppies, you think church people are great and the leaders are great and you trust them and you know. But to everybody below your age, this is what it says, 24% of 18 to 34 say pastors and clergy have a high honesty. But that means nearly 75% aren't quite so sure. Okay. That leads to people deconstructing their faith in a negative way, not considering all sides, not looking at it carefully. They just decide it's not real. Yuval Lin in New York Times wrote this: how did Americans lose faith in everything? We lose faith in an institution when we no longer believe it plays this ethical role of teaching people to be trustworthy. That's where people are a lot about religion right now. Matthew 26:59 says, the chief priests, the elders, and all the council sought false testimony. You listen to this. This is the leadership of the Jews that he's talking about. He calls them hypocrites. He calls them blind. He calls them fools. He calls them serpents. This is his leadership in his day. Nothing's changed. The world's the same as it was. And he does that. Why? Because Matthew 26:59 says, the chief priests, the elders, and all the council, that's everybody in the Jewish leadership that meant anything, sought false testimony. It didn't say they sought testimony against Jesus. It says they sought false testimony against Jesus. Seeking the false, if you seek it hard enough in deconstructing your faith, and so you think you're just an honest person, but you only look at one side, okay? So you look at everything that says the church is not what it should be, you will find it. You will end up not believing in the church or anything about Christianity. If you want to find a rotten egg, you'll find it. I promise you. It's there for you to find. Perverse leaders or someone seeking to perverse something, you will find it. So Christians can have deconstructing faith from perverse obstinacy, unwilling to listen or change or do anything. We got to guard against that. The last point I want you to see, hopefully this will all come together at the end. Maybe you're a little confused right now, and I'm sorry. Political obeisance. Now, I don't want to reread all of 34 through 38, but I want you to understand that the leadership of the Jews were entirely too political. You may not know this, but the high priest was not chosen the way it was supposed to be in Jesus' day. The Romans chose who the high priest was. They chose Caiaphas, and they chose Annas, and they told them when one needed to retire. And that was the way it went on until the destruction of Jerusalem. I'm just telling you that they were very politically savvy. But another thing that they were is they were becoming more and more violent to accomplish their end. That's right. It says in verse 34, kill, crucify, scourge, persecute. Look at all those violent words. Verse 35, it says, bloodshed, blood of the righteous, blood of Zacharias, murdered between. Verse 37, O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, one who kills the prophets and stones. They became, so the more politically engaged, and you should pay attention to what's going on in the world, the more politically engaged people become, the more willing to use crazy tactics. Might want to keep you out of politics. John 16 verse 2 says, whoever kills you will think he offers God service. How could that ever be? His name was Saul. He changed it to Paul. Yeah, it can happen. So too, people watching that. Now you're looking at younger people, not you older with this stuff on your head so much, but the younger ones. Looking at what we do, and they may see what good is religion. Is it accomplishing things? So the acceptance of political party idolatry, and that's what I will call it. If you're very political, I would suggest that you need to back off from it because you're probably idolatrous toward it. The acceptance of political party idolatry and adopting nationalistic faith will draw us into this and run people off. Well, we should put an American flag up there on the stand. Yeah, you're going to run folks off, especially the young people. You know that, right? So you want to talk about your political persuasion, you ought to hush. You're going to run folks off. You think you're doing the world a favor, doing the church a favor. You can talk to anybody privately you want to about whatever you think you need to talk to about. I'm not telling you can't do it. I'm just telling you, you may not be accomplishing what you think. We're not about trying to win people to become Americans. We're about winning somebody to follow Christ Jesus. America will not exist one day. Okay? I don't think there will be an American heaven. Just be heaven, right? The Jews were totally political. Even amongst the apostles, there was signs of political. There's some serious signs of being political in the apostles. But that went away. John 11, verse 48. If we let him alone, the Romans will come and take away both our place and nation. They'd gotten so embroiled in politics that they were more scared of losing their position than they were of doing what was right. In Matthew 20, verse 21, grant that these two sons of mine sit one on your right hand and the other on the left in your kingdom. They're not talking about heaven. They're talking about a political situation. They thought that Jesus was going to establish a kingdom on earth, and that's all their thinking was about. Acts 1 and verse 6 says, will you at this time restore the kingdom to Israel? Not the kingdom to the world or God's kingdom here. They wanted a kingdom on the planet that would just rule and have power. Jesus said over and over again, what you want is not the kingdom of heaven. You want a different kingdom. Matthew 24, verses 1 and 2, it's not one stone will be left upon another. That's the temple. Go look. It's gone. That's a message from God, my brothers and sisters. You do know that, right? That was a message from God. I'm done with that. You got it? I'm done with playing games like that. That was not getting us where we needed to go. In Luke 21, verses 20 through 24, it says, just verse 20, but when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then know that its desolation is near. Who's responsible for that? Oh, it's just Rome. No, my brothers and sisters, that was God. And they thought very dedicated, but they were just wonky as they could be politically. In Luke 23, verses 28 through 30, daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me, but weep for yourselves. Days are coming in which they will say, blessed are the barren, because we don't want to be pregnant when the Jerusalem's being destroyed. Verse 30, they will begin to say to the mountains, fall on us, and the hills cover us. I don't want to see this happening. That's where that goes. Be careful what you wish for. In Matthew chapter 7, verses 13 and 14, this mainly is in anticipation of what was coming. We always want to make it about the end of the world, but in the context, if you stay in the context and you read it in Young's literal translation, listen to what it's really saying here, because it may not be saying what you think it says. It says, go ye in through the straight gate, because wide is the gate and broad is the way that is leading to the destruction. Not to destruction, but to the destruction. And many are those going in through it right now. He's telling them what was happening to them right now. They were about to be destroyed. Verse 14, how straight is the gate and compressed the way that is leading to life. You got to be careful. You want to live through this. And few are those finding it. Go back and study that. See if you come away with a different perspective. Israel was bound to be destroyed. The Jews were hyper-political partisans, and it is creeping into the church. Amy Peterson, former missionary, writes this. It was on a book called Where Goodness Still Grows. People of my generation aren't leaving the church because their devious atheistic professors got to them, but because they saw a church more interested in defending political power than in loving their neighbors. Timothy Keller, the New York Times, said this. Timothy Keller, smart man, folks. While believers can register under a party affiliation and be active in politics, they should not identify the church or faith with a political party as the only Christian one. I know. If you're that way, you don't like what I just said. It's discouraging to watch people who taught you discernment fall into political, conspiratorial rabbit holes or inflaming politics. 1 Samuel 15, verse 23, stubbornness is idolatry. Don't forget. Don't worship America. Ezekiel 14:4, everyone who sets up his idol in his heart. Oh, I don't have an idol. If you value something above this and what we're about, you do. You have an idol. You can call it whatever you want. Red, white, and blue is not what I'm following. It's about the red mainly. Colossians 3:5, covetousness is idolatry. Beware you do not preach America or party over Jesus. Jesus saves. That's it. Jesus saves. Christians can have. And what am I saying? I'm saying you deconstructing faith, you can destroy somebody's faith by being too political. Some of you need to get off Facebook, internet. You should never post again because you don't know how to measure your words. Deconstructing faith. Christians can have, and that's the whole lesson there. These are just four. These are just four. This is not the whole subject. Okay? Participant overwhelming. You can be one of the leading members of the church and end up quitting because you get burned out. And it happens. And they dig into what they believe and then say, oh, well, maybe, and then they end up looking into it. And what they're really doing is looking for what's wrong with the church, and they end up leaving. Prideful orthodoxy. That's when we're so proud of what we believe that we can drive everybody away because we don't let people even think for themselves. And you got to let people think for themselves and even disagree with you. I want to have a series Sunday nights of just question and answer. And you know what I want? I want you to disagree. Because if you cannot feel like you can disagree with the preacher or with the elders, by the way, who are wrong from time to time, believe it or not, you elders, believe me, I've seen it. So if you can't accept that, you're not really in a good headspace because these people need to see that you're just human too. And you're willing to consider, you might be wrong. You might be wrong. Just that. That's all it's got to be. It doesn't have to be, I'm definitely wrong. It's just, I could be wrong on something. Perverse obstinacy. When we are perverted and we won't deal with the perversions and we're obstinate about it. Or political obeisance, where we just, we're church. I've seen churches, and y'all have seen it on TV, and they just like pledge allegiance. God forbid. And I'm not against the Pledge of Allegiance, but folks, not in church. Not when we're worshiping God. We come here to worship God. So this does not have to be a completely divided path, being on one side only, but here are my words of caution. You might have thought I was on that already, but here we go. So, word of warning to those taking pride in their deconstruction. So, if you're proud that you've destroyed, taken apart all that you believe, and you've decided you're sitting there and saying, yeah, but I know what's wrong with you about the instrument, or I know what's wrong with you about baptism, or I know what's wrong with the church about this. And we have that. Not so much Sunday nights, but we do have that. Sitting on Sunday morning especially, we have people sitting there doing that. Deconstruction without reconstruction is a tragedy, folks. It's not smart. There's no limit to deconstruction, and you can come out the other side lonely, bitter, and hopeless if you go down that rabbit hole too deep. If your deconstruction does not make you more generous, compassionate, hopeful, and merciful to more people like Jesus was, your deconstruction is worthless, and you need to stop it. There are things that need to be reevaluated. Amen? But a Christ-honoring deconstruction reveals the truth and the beauty, not cynicism and arrogance. It's good to look at what you believe. But if you only examine one side of any topic and you claim you're digging in, you're dishonest. And you're not going to end up where you should be. The other word, a word of warning, is to those taking offense with those in deconstruction. Now I'm talking to you who are more mature. You're in my zone. History has shown reevaluation and restoration can be a good thing. Basically, that's what Jesus was doing. Beware of outright dismissal of grievances of deconstructing Christians. Oh, he's just wanting to leave the faith. Maybe not. Maybe not. Leaving the church as if he's got a good reason for it. Well, he might. Maybe you just need to talk to him. You know, maybe they just need to know that somebody actually cares. Deconstruction can end in reconstruction and restoration movements. We had one, didn't we? I think there was this thing called the Reformation movement. It was actually a good thing. And then there was a restoration movement. It was actually a good thing. But that was taking apart. That was deconstructing things to try to get down to what was really important. That's a good thing. Could it happen today? Yes, of course it could happen today. People need a safe place to ask questions and raise concerns. I don't like what we're doing. Okay. What do you think we should be doing, and why do you think it's wrong? That's good. It's not wrong. And if it's not at church, if you can't do that at church, where else on the planet can you do it? You've got to be able to ask questions here. I want the young people to come up to me and say, I don't agree with anything you just said. And not because I want them to disagree, but because I think they need to do that from time to time. I didn't like it. It's okay. We can exile those that we think have legitimate grievances, but what good will that do? So restoration requires a little vision, because otherwise we do the other to our own peril. Jesus was crucified because they could not deconstruct their faith. The Jews could not see that they were going down the wrong path. They just couldn't see it. So kill the man who says we should. Daughter came home from school. This is my last. I'm about to end. Daughter came home from school and said, Mom, you're not going to believe what happened in history class today. Said the professor told the class that they were going to play a game. He walked around the room and he whispered in the ear to each kid whether or not they were a witch or a regular person. He said, this is a game. So he went around, whispered into each kid's ear. Then he gave the instruction, form the biggest group or the largest group you possibly can without a witch in your group. If your group has even one witch, you fail this game. And he let them go. So the whole room instantly lit up with suspicion. Everyone started interrogating the other. Are you a witch? And how do you know? Maybe you're lying to me because now you're a witch and you're covering it up. Some kids clung to one big group because they wanted to win with the big group. But most broke off into smaller groups and exclusive cliques that they were kind of buds with, and they'd all talk to each other. You a witch? No, I'm not a witch. Are you a witch? And it seemed uncertain. They were nervous about the whole game. And anybody that gave off the slightest hint that they were not being 100% honest or they were slightly guilty, they were excluded. The energy shifted really fast in the room, and everyone was suspicious of everyone in the class, whispering. They began to whisper. People were talking to them. What's that? What did they do? They were whispering about each other and finger pointing, side eyes, looking at each other from the side to see what they were doing. Trust in the class dissolved in minutes. And finally, when all the groups were finally formed and the teacher said, okay, have you done it? All right, time to find out who fails. Witches, raise your hands. And no hand went up. The whole class, what? Wait. You messed up the game. Then the teacher dropped the bomb. Did I? Were there any actual witches in Salem? Or did everyone just believe what they were told? My daughter went on to say, the lady said, that the room went dead silent at that. And then it hit them. No witch was ever needed for the damage to happen. Fear had already done its work. Suspicion alone had divided the entire class, turning the community into chaos. And isn't that kind of what we see today? Different words, maybe, same playbook. Get people scared, get them suspicious, get them divided. The danger was never the witch. The danger is the rumor. The danger is the suspicion of your brother. The danger is the fear of what somebody asking questions might be up to. Beware of the danger. Let's learn to be patient with each other, amen? And let people do some thinking. We should not be afraid of any question, amen? We should be open to any honest discussion. Always. Any question, any time. And to say, well, I don't know if I'll agree with that, Brother Dutton. Well, let's talk. Maybe you're right. And maybe we're wrong. You got to be willing. If you're here tonight and you've never obeyed the gospel, it may just be that you've never been willing to consider, maybe I'm not right. You can't obey the gospel if you think you're always right, can you? So even to obey the gospel, you have to say, I think I'm wrong. I need to get right. That can go on every day. And you can continually come back to the Lord. I think I'm not right about everything. Wouldn't that be a shocker to your kids for them to hear that? I'm not right about everything. Yeah. Or maybe just be honest. If you're here tonight and you've not given your life to the Lord, we want to help you every way we can. You just come forward while we stand and while we sing.